Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Cora Paul Bomar Summit. Normally, we'd be gathering together in person, and I really miss that. And actually, today we'd be bringing out a birthday cake and asking you to sing happy birthday and embarrass Dr. Hirschberger. So if you see her, say happy birthday to her. But we are delighted to have you here virtually. We're going to take just a second for Tammy Brewer to give you some tips about how to maneuver through this Zoom session.
Hello, everyone. We just wanted to make sure you had just the best viewing experience for today. And so we have just a few slides at the beginning. But once that's over and our guest speakers start, then you'll want to see or expand your view to full view screen if you haven't already done so. And in the upper corner, there will be a little view button. If you'll click that and click speaker view, at that point, you'll either see our guest speaker large and the participants at the top, or you'll see our panel. So those are very important things to remember. You'll still be able to see your chat on the side so that you can contribute that way. Also, to participate, we would like for you to keep yourself muted just because of the number of people that are in the room today. But if you would like to share your video, when you hover at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see these different tools. So your video screen is here. You can also click to see everyone who's participating today. If you click on participants, and then the chat box. If it isn't activated already, make sure that you click that so that we can understand and hear you. You'll be asked at some point today to put your specific questions during the panel to our moderator. There'll be a person there named moderator. So that's what you'll do for our chat piece. And then also click if you do have some reactions, if you're excited about what some of our speakers have to say, then we'd love to see your reactions as well. And there's a button there for that. So we're excited that you're here today. And if you have any questions, you can chat Tammy in the chat box and I'll try to help.
Thank you, Tammy. This event is made possible through a fund named for Cora Paul. So I want to tell you just a little bit about her. Cora Paul was a teacher in rural Tennessee. She began her career in 1932. She eventually became a leader and advocate for school libraries. She was a recipient of numerous honors and awards, a strong advocate for libraries. She testified before the United States House of Representatives and Senate committees on 6 occasions. President Lyndon B. Johnson invited her to attend the signing of some pro-library legislation in 1964. She served as president of the American Association of School Librarians from 1963 to 64. In 1966, she was appointed the first director of the North Carolina's Division of Educational Media. She was so effective in her advocacy that by the time of her departure from that organization in 1969, virtually every secondary and primary school in North Carolina had a library. Cora Paul joined the faculty of the Library Science and Technology Department at UNC Greensboro, where she remained until her retirement in 1979 and her death in Greensboro in 2008. So we remember her and the generous donations that made this possible. Before we get started, I would like to officially begin this program with a moment of silence and reflection for us to remember the innocent victims of the violence that has happened this past week and this past year, innocent victims of violence, both physical, mental, and emotional, perpetrated in hate and racism. So I'd like for us to take a few moments to reflect on that. Thank you. I think we need to work hard not to forget. Okay, next, I wanted to just present a way for some official ground rules for our interaction today. We want to use I statements, recognize this as a learning space. We want to listen to understand versus to respond. We want to focus on the message and the content versus delivery. Our impact is more important than our intentions when we speak. And I think importantly, don't mistake comfort for safety. Learning and growing requires discomfort. Perfection is not a goal. Today, we seek sincere engagement with one another. With that, I think that we are ready to begin our program. I am so excited to introduce Wanda K Brown to you, and we thank her for being here with us. Wanda is the Director of Library Services at the C.G. O'Kelly Library at Winston-Salem State University. She has been a member of ALA for 30 years. You don't look old enough to have done that, Wanda. She's an active member of many of the ALA associations. She is a 2015 recipient of the DEMCO ALA Black Caucus Award for Excellence, the 2013 BC ALA Leadership Award, and the 2012 BC ALA Distinguished Service Award. In 2009, she received the University of North Carolina Greensboro COVAX Award for Outstanding Alumni Achievement. And in 2013, UNCG awarded Brown with the School of Education Outstanding Alumni Achievement Award. In April 2018, she was elected president-elect of the American Library Association. As ALA president, Wanda has been the chief elected officer for the largest library association in the world. She has a BA in English with a minor in psychology from Winston-Salem University. And most important to us, she is our alum from the University of Greensboro. So we welcome Wanda. Thank you for being here. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. O'Connor, for your warm introduction. And also to Mr. Hoffman, you and him served as a great team, welcoming and inviting me to be a participant today. I also want to personally thank each of you that has made the decision to join us this morning. For many of us, this is a day like many have become, full of Zoom and team meetings. So for committing to one more, I want to say thank you. Then secondly, I thank Dr. Connor for setting the tone for this morning's conversation, because this morning's conversation is about leading from the heart. So secondly, I thank you for choosing library and information services as your profession. This morning's conversation is for all library workers. So no matter where on the spectrum you are, you might be a library school student, a new librarian looking for your first position. You might be a newly hired staff person, or you just might be a veteran to library work. The we that I use in this morning's conversation is for all of us. So while I was traveling as ALA president, one of the things I think that really stuck with me the most was how energized and excited people were about the work we were doing. So, you know, this was pre the pandemic. People were energized and excited. People would come up to me after I would speak and say, you know, I was tapped to lead my library simply because I had a college degree. I was tapped to lead my library just because I frequented it. So it was all kind of conversations, but you know, one thing that stood clear was they all came excited and energized. I believe they had the passion for the work they were doing. So I like to think that that passion is what has fueled us and energized us and keeps us going. So it truly takes all of us working together to make a difference in the lives of the users that we serve. So I thank you yet again for investing a few minutes in yourself today. So certainly the work that we do is a great work. It is built on the very foundation of service. And it's with most professions of service, having the heart for that service is essential. So if you've had the opportunity to be served by a member of the medical profession. You had a child enrolled in the K through 12 school system, or perhaps you enrolled yourself. You know what it means when I say the heart for the work they do. Perhaps you've had a recent awesome encounter of customer services. Perhaps a favorite teacher, a favorite instructor comes to mind. Whichever, you are fully aware of why those people and those experiences come to mind. This morning, we will explore this concept of leading with the heart and how it relates to leading within our libraries, our profession, and our personal lives. Now, I just want to set the stage correctly this morning. Please know that I consider each of you a leader. As I tell myself repeatedly, the camera of life rolls on you each day. You are the center, the main attraction to someone that day. How will you perform? How will others see you? Will those who encounter you find you fully engaged, excited, ready to serve? This past year, 2020, will go down in history for sure as a year of loss, change, reflection, and redirection. We lost many of the things we took for granted: freedom to travel, freedom to connect with our family, our friends, our loved ones. We lost much of what life, as we were so accustomed to, was altered, right? But in those losses, I contend we also found discovery. With each loss, we found strength in our reflecting. We thought about what was important. We each redirected our approach and found a way to survive and, yes, even thrive during this year. We saw it everywhere, right? We saw it in restaurants, pivoting to curbside service, Uber Eats, Grubhub, grocery deliveries, and much more. Retailers who were pivoting to meet the needs of the users they served. And gratefully, I am that libraries also took a deeper look and we joined right in. We pivoted with fresh new approaches for delivery of services. We aligned with community partners in projects that demonstrated a love for the community that we serve and a desire to bridge the gaps that surfaced during the pandemic. Some of these newly discovered services will go forth as parts of our daily life. Have you found a new approach that you plan to implement and keep going? How much of what you resorted to this year as far as programming will you want? Virtual story times, curbside deliveries, I working behind plexiglass. A lot of this, I think we will continue. I think this will stay. The pivot to hybrid classes, virtual orientation, virtual interviews are each likely to continue. You've just got to read the literature and you'll see how other disciplines are also envisioning a new normal. Church services will probably never go back to being what they were. Beauty salons will never be overcrowded probably again. So I think that this pandemic impacted us, but it gave us an opportunity to recreate. But the pandemic was but one area of major impact for us this year, the nation and our profession. The killing of George Floyd and others sparked national protests and a call that crossed racial lines for introspection. For many of us, this became yet another opportunity to reflect upon our personal values, to rethink our services, to revisit our curriculum, to review our hiring policies and practices. It was a time to redesign our approaches and our commitments to creating purposeful, driven connections across cultures. Many universities crafted statements of support, but of those statements that were crafted, the ones I was most taken with were the ones who included action statements. So from this day forward, we're going to do this. And there were some, I know the American Library Association issued a statement that said, yes, we have been a racist organization, have not been as we should. So ownership was a part of what this past year we saw. These statements, though, also demonstrated an action to follow. That was a desire to learn or to change or to help heal our nation. In other words, they shared an action that demonstrated a change of heart. So I recently read yesterday online that we were talking and congratulating Jerome Alford, who has just been given the position at the Harvard University Library as the AUL to head anti-racism. And so I read the blurb, I went to the website and it said, the anti-racism is a new pivotal role for Harvard Library and the research library community at large. It was created to embed anti-racism into the foundation of Harvard's library's vision for advancing open knowledge. Expanding upon the library's strong record of diversity initiatives, the AUL for Anti-Racism will collaborate extensively to lead the development of strategies for systemic change through our workforce, our services, collections, and spaces. Now, that's just one example of a university's, I think, approach to showing they had compassion and that they were touched in such a way that they put their actions and their money and their thinking towards a path for conscious redirections for their library and campus. And I know my alma mater, UNCG, you had book club readings, you did other things that showed that not only were you just issuing a statement, but you really believed that change was necessary and you were doing what you could. So I think that as we look back over 2020 with the pandemic and the racial unrest, we saw that those presented us with crisis-driven opportunities, right? So did you jump at the opportunity? I think there were many who did. They went forward with sincere interest. They led with the heart. And now we see visible and rewarding results shared in communities all over. So yes, I'll say it again. It is a mighty work that we do. We, as a profession, we're used to pivoting. That's what keeps us relevant in our communities. What these people did behind their acts of support, their change, their redirection, they had to have some guiding principles. They had to have a belief that they could change and impact the communities around them. I would offer that they led with their heart, that they had compassion, they had a vision, and that they were personally committed to excellence. So I'm going to discuss a few of the possible scenarios or a few principles I'd like to believe that the people, the libraries, the people who work in them, the communities who rally together, I believe that these are some of the attributes that they possess. And as I outline these paths, I want us to consider them, and I want you to think about them personally and where you see yourself in the spectrum. So first, I believe that they had a love for the work they do. When you care about what you do, people know it, people see it. The work gets accomplished. You're happier, you're healthier, you're energized, and you're confident. This makes space for creativity to flourish. When you thought about the services that were needed from your communities, you were compelled to consider them personally. Many of you asked, how can we keep our staff as safe as possible? Staff came to mind first. So we found a way, and that's where the mixed emotions took over, and we created the flexible work from home schedules, creative programming options, varying delivering services, models for some who, there are some of us, and I'll say, who pressed their way to come into the office daily because they saw themselves as essential as others, as people in the medical profession or people who worked in grocery stores. And yes, even that person who made their way to McDonald's. There are some library workers who felt very strongly about making sure they were in a position to help their communities be successful. Some of you reached out and formed ventures, partnerships across your communities. The results of which enrich the lives of your community, loaning hotspots, loaning laptops, allowing people in your community to drive up to your library and access the Wi-Fi. Those are just examples of things that people were doing. Secondly, though, I believe that these library workers were immersed in a culture of creativity and experimentation. They were used to thinking about how can I continue to improve? How can I continue to get better? Some had already invested in virtual training. Some campuses already had Zoom licenses. Staff reached out to faculty, to communities, gave careful thought around the courses they were designing, the needs of the community. They asked for an opportunity to be included. They were unafraid to step up and give their opinions. The staff was committed to the mission. So therefore, that was the leading factor. That's what drove us. That's what energized us during this past year. Thirdly, these staff were already learning about mindfulness and the value of being mindful within the workplace. Incorporating these principles was so spot on in these difficult days. Mindfulness was woven into the teaching, the programming, and the pursuit of professional development. The pandemic forced new ways of learning, new classroom participation. This was all adding layers of stress. Parents were working at home, assisting their homeschoolers all at the same time. So principles of mindfulness were useful in fostering a culture of understanding and acceptance. I'm loving the commercials on TV that show people coming to a Zoom minus some of their clothes, or coming to a Zoom and their kids are crawling all across their lap, because we understand that these are difficult times and that the principle of mindfulness is what allows us to be understanding and accepting. So next, though, I firmly believe that library workers in the past challenging year viewed their place within their community as essential. They knew that they represented the only hope, the only source of knowledge, the only source of acceptance within that community. So, having said that, directors actively sought to have staff hired that reflected every segment of that community. They sought to have collections that supported the growth, that welcomed and embraced differences. They thought of themselves as leaders, compassionate for self and others. So when members of their staff brought forth issues that showed a gap within that community, they listened because they understood everybody's approach to life was different. Everybody's experiences were different. And when you bring a team together, if that team is diverse, you're more likely to hear all the varying points. And their table is full because it represents all different perspectives. These compassionate staff were already being offered webinars and trainings that encourage them to be culturally competent. They acknowledged their privilege and discussed at length within the organization what this meant. They were encouraged to seek internal perspectives around how they viewed others, recognizing that they each saw life through the lens of their individual experiences. They sought to understand as well as to be understood. Library schools embrace the challenge of producing culturally educated, diverse recruits. Respect for differences was demonstrated and woven into the fabric of the faculty hired, the classes taught, and the curriculum used. Certainly, your staff reflected on the community it served. All opinions welcomed, listened to, and woven into the decision-making process. This appreciation for differences helped you understand that digital disconnect. You understood the racial climate in 2020 and took this as an opportunity to be a leader on your campus, in your library, in your community. You sought ways to be part of the solution, to educate, to influence, and to help heal a nation divided. Perhaps these staff embrace continued learning as a requirement for success. They recognize the value of being fully prepared. Staff were tasked with crafting their own personal learning plans. Networking was encouraged as a roadmap for growth. Each staff member had a growth mindset. Does any of what I have shared with you this morning on this roadmap outline resonate with you? Is it a path that you are on? Were these affirming? Were you saying, yes, that applies to me, that applies to my library, that applies to our school? Would you agree today to look for ways to embed that culture wherever you are? When one has a deep desire to serve, to make a difference, leading comes naturally. And I said, I'll go back and reiterate what I said earlier. I'm not only talking to people who happen to have a position of leadership. We are all leaders. Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, says, if you are working on something exciting that you really care about, you don't have to be pushed. The vision pulls you. I contend the vision we shared around service to our communities pulled us. It pulled us to explore. It led us to imagine the possibility, to create, to rethink, to implement, and then to evaluate. Those individuals, those libraries who allowed that vision to pull them, those are the ones who are most successful. Those are the ones where the time of a nation filled with racial unrest, they were there, hands and hearts open for what can I do to help? I ask you today, so are you ready to lead? Are you ready? Is your heart in the work you do? I know some of you library school students, as you're exploring which part of librarianship you want to go in, I just want you to first know, fully be committed. This profession is, yes, what I want. I just haven't decided where my skills and my heart come align, right? I heard a speech a long time ago by the CEO, he was the then CEO of BB&T Bank, who talked about the importance of choosing a vocation from the heart, something you care about, because when you care about it, you will give it your best. So will this past year, 2020, and as we go further and further into 21, will this be the year that you refocused, you recommitted yourself? to the work ahead. I want to hear from you now, if possible. Has this year brought some positives for you? Some things that you would like to see go forward? Have you had a chance to take a deeper look inside and determine which way you can best impact the communities that you serve? It's a time for self-reflection. So drop a line in the chat or let's talk. Be your own champion for your success. I thank you this morning. I hope someone will chime in and talk a little bit. Any talkers? No one?
Wanda, this is April. I'm moderating. And we have a question from the chat.
Okay.
There seems to be more stories lately where library boards for public libraries or board of trustees for academic libraries seem to have a different vision for the library than many library staff or faculty have. How can we help bring the folks on these committees closer to the librarian's vision for their library and community?
I think we have to tell our stories. I think we have to, first, there are two things. I think, first of all, we've got to find a way to embed ourselves so thick in the campus, in the communities, that the people who serve on the boards are going to see the difference we're making on that campus or in that community. That's one thing. And then I still say that we still have to tell those success stories. And I'm not sure we do a great job of, letting people know or coming back. I know at an academic institution, you very rarely hear people come back and say, you helped me with this and I was able to get this accomplished. So our annual report should be pushing those kind of stories, pushing the successful partnerships that we've aligned on our campuses so that we broaden our area of the area that we're reaching so people understand more about it. I just think it's a lack of understanding. I just think it's a fight that we have to commit to keep fighting. We just have to keep trying to pursue our campus culture so that it appreciates and values the work that we can bring.
Thank you. That was the only question I had in the chat. If anyone else has a question that I'd like to submit through the chat, you can send it to me, to the moderator.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Thank you so much for being a part of this morning's session. I'm excited. I've got to stay here glued to for the next presentation. I'm excited to hear the comments that are coming forward. Thank you so very much.
Wanda, there was one more chat question that popped up, and it is, what do you see as the most crucial change in libraries due to the pandemic?
The most crucial change. Well, I'm just going to speak for us. I think the most crucial change was the way we had to, realign our spaces. We were so proud of becoming the hub, the place where people wanted to come, the place where people were connecting and working on projects together. And now you're having to say, I'm sorry, if your group is over this size, we can't accommodate you. You're not, we don't have a space in here where you can be socially distanced to do that. So to me, that's the greatest change. The greatest change was our ability to wrap our arms, the things that we were proud of, being that, place where people would come and be cramped all in there together. We can no longer do that. And I really miss the rooms being crowded and being, kids everywhere, close to each other, bundled up around computers. It's a different look now. Everybody's, more spread out. So that's what I think is the greatest loss.
Thank you, Wanda. There's one more that's popped up. Have you seen any particularly successful measure for addressing accessibility issues since the pandemic has restricted staffing space and resources?
I haven't. I can't say that I have seen in a successful. Well, wouldn't you say though that the ability to drop things off or to, you know, the curbside pickups and things like that, isn't that a way of addressing some accessibility issues? Of course, not really sure. I don't think I really, that's something I haven't focused on. It's a great question, so now I want to look it up, but I can't say that I've seen a lot of that. And it could be some answer might pop up in my head later, but it's not popping there now. But if someone else can answer, I'm all for sharing the platform. If someone else has seen something and would like to answer this question, feel free.
While they're thinking about what to share, there's a comment here. Thank you for serving on the ALA search committee and bringing Tracy Hall in as the executive director. What can we do to help her succeed?
You can encourage members to keep their membership, right? Because I think the biggest, I'm going to say two things. The biggest challenge I think for ALA is two things right now. One is financial. We have to find a way to be financially stable. So if your major revenues are conference and publishing, those things are kind of all dwindling, and membership is next, and members are not renewing because members are struggling also financially, then there's no way the organization can continue in the same path that it is. So it has to rethink that. And I think that's where the members come in, because we are a member organization. So members can help us by being successful, by also sharing what it is you need the most for ALA to be for you, right? So some years ago, I gave a presentation too, and I put in a presentation is members ask themselves, what have you done for me lately? So I think that members now need to reach out to their association and tell them what it is you could do for me. If I could outline your path going forward, what would it include? If I was to be and tell you that I would join if I was guaranteed to get X, Y, and Z. And we just have to figure out a way that it's affordable and doable for everybody, right? So, and that means that ALA also has to have some other revenue streams as well. And I think Tracy is on point there. So I do think she's a great hire. And I think that that's going to make the biggest difference to the association's future, is having a person of Tracy's caliber in place.
Any other questions from the chat? I don't see any more right now, but post away.
Well, thank you, April. We'll go ahead and continue on. If you think of questions for Wanda, maybe we can take them at the very end. You can go ahead and post them anyway. I'm very excited to introduce to you our panel of ACE scholars. I gave this panel over to them, and I want to thank Martha Anderson, who I'll introduce in just a second. She developed the theme of this panel and all the questions. She put in a great amount of work, and I give you my sincere appreciation. So Martha Anderson is originally from Monterrey, Mexico. She's been in this country for 30 years. She's had 3 careers. One as an elementary educator, one as a business executive, and currently she is a digital librarian and archivist and leads the digital service department, which she created at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. She is also currently an Association of Research Libraries Leadership and Career Development Program Fellow, and she is a 2011 ACE Scholar. Gabriel Graña is a teacher librarian at RD and Uzell Smith Middle School in Chapel Hill. He is eager to talk about Star Wars. He and I also share a love of hip hop. He's concerned about how representation matters and how libraries can change the world. I am giving you his Twitter handle in the chat here so that you can keep up with him. Oh, and it's also on the screen there. And finally, we also have Ingrid Ruffin. She is a U.S. Air Force Iraq War veteran. Thank you so much sincerely for your service, Ingrid. She is currently an associate professor and head of Learning Commons at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Her interests include creativity in higher education, emotional health and wellness, and leadership and management. And she is also a 2011 A Scholar. The topic that they have come up with is preparing your organization for all the EDI recruiting and work that you might do. Too often we begin this conversation with recruitment, and these A Scholars want to talk with you about how preparing your environment before that happens. So I'm going to turn it over to you all. Thank you so much for being here.
Good morning, and thank you for attending our panel discussion. I am Marta Anderson, and as far as getting ready for this panel discussion, we titled it, the subtitle, Setting the Stage Before the Hire. It is our opinion that we usually talk about hiring and retention for DEI and librarianship recruiting, but we seldom talk about setting the stage, what the organizational culture should look like before we bring DI and BIPOC librarians into the organization. Our hope as panelists is to shed some light into what we think it should happen. It's just recommendations, and I am certain that you're gonna have your own. So with that in mind, I will be asking some questions to Ingrid and Gabriel, and we'll start with the first question. The first question, what are some of the challenges of working in an almost monoculture environment? And for that, I'm gonna provide some context for monoculture, understanding it as a predominantly one culture. Managers with a certain mindset hire and promote people with the same mindset, sending the message that those who think differently are not welcome. And when I'm talking about monoculture, I also want you to consider, and I know Ingrid and Gabriel, you cover that, it will depend also on your environment, right? Monoculture is not always a barrier. Sometimes could be a good thing if you, depending on where you stand. So take it away.
Okay, I guess I'll start. One of the challenges is that more often than not, so organization can recruit a lot of diversity, a lot of, bring in the hires, but the surrounding cities also reflect a monoculture. And what happens is that the person recruited into those cities and spaces isn't prepared. So they might find a safe space at their organization, but they might not find a safe space in the city and surrounding area in which they live. And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges that a lot of organizations don't realize, is that the surrounding area means is just as important as the work and the place of work to the person coming into their organization. I think some of the other challenges are oftentimes when people come in contact with things that are different, their first response is maybe one of like revulsion, and you might not even realize that you're seeing it. And rather than saying, oh, that's different, let me investigate, we become and take a posture of kind of pushing away. And so what can happen is that people coming into monocultural environments can feel unwelcome because of people not preparing themselves to be able to kind of like honestly engage with their own personal feelings about difference, as well as just their personal feelings, as well as their reactions to difference.
Yeah, and I echo all of that. Thank you for starting us off like that. I think that yeah, thinking about the surrounding town and the surrounding area is certainly significant. I work in Chapel Hill, which because of the university is predominantly a lot of people who came to this area to have their kids in our schools, right? So I work in a middle school, and one of the things that happened to me, at least when I was brought in, I'll share my personal story, was a sort of subtle version of like tokenization, I guess, where I was brought in and told fairly explicitly that as a Latino male, I was expected to reach our struggling Latino populations. And because I had worked previously in a school that had a predominantly Black and Latino population, that I was expected to sort of like fix the reading gap, right? And it was this, like, it was on me to do that, right? And part of that is a symptom of the monoculture thing, where, it's a bit of the, like, on the hiring end was kind of patting themselves in the back for bringing in a Latino male. There were only 2 of us otherwise in the building. So bringing me in to do that job without really providing the culture and the context in the building, like, for that to be successful and for that to be supported by other teachers as well. So that was a massive challenge for me that I didn't even know how to begin to confront. So I think understanding the culture, and that if you bring someone in, they're not going to be like the silver bullet for you, is extremely important. And something that over time was sort of we had explicit conversations about that. But in my first couple of years, I was not necessarily called out by leadership, but we had conversations where I felt like, okay, you really expected me as this guy to come in and do all these things, when it's impossible. I could do a lot. I'm a librarian. I could do a lot, but I can't do everything, So I think that was pretty significant.
All right. Thank you both. And to the audience, we have a series of questions that we're gonna go through. So I think perhaps the best format is if anyone has any questions for us as it pertains to this specific question of challenges in working on a monoculture environment. And I think the moderator will feed the questions, right?
Yes, that's right. And right now there haven't been any questions posted, but I will share after you do a pause. But okay. Right now there isn't anything. But if anybody has one, feel free to share it, and I will bring it to the forefront.
All right. So while the audience is thinking and perhaps typing questions, I'm gonna move to number 2. And my question to both is, at this point in your career, do you have a different need or expectation for how you are accepted in your organization?
Yeah, I can start with that one. Definitely. And I hinted at it a little bit in my previous answer, but we've had, thankfully our district has invested in, culturally relevant educational practices and like REI trainings and different things to get people to understand exactly what like our specific districts like achievement and opportunity gap means, let alone to really get a better grasp of what it is to be like culturally competent, right? And so we, at one of the trainings in particular that we had, where the presenter and I connected really well, and she basically pulled the and I'm gonna be me here because this is kind of how I am. She pulled the little cubanito back out of me, like it was, I buried it so deeply because of like, again, like that perception that I had to come in and act a certain way and be a certain way. And so now I'm feeling a little more like I can be a little, to a certain extent, a little more freely myself. It's not 100% there yet, but so that expectation certainly is different, but you know, there's still obviously, and sorry, I'm gonna look at the question one more time because my mind went off on a little tangent there. But you know, I think that there still needs to be a lot more effort put into making sure that people feel like they can bring the best of themselves to their position, right? And culturally bring the best of themselves to their position, because especially working with young people, like they need to see themselves in us. And if they don't see themselves in us, they're gonna feel like we're just another, you know, Charlie Brown voice, blah, 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 you know, like from on high. So I think that that's one thing that has changed for me a lot.
I think for me, I started out as a diversity resident librarian in my organization. And over the years, I've kind of moved through the ranks of our library and leadership. And so I think one of the things we have to think about is, as we're welcoming, you know, new and more diverse people into our organizations and the field, is that the face of what leadership looks like is going to change. And even how leadership operates, leadership and authority is going to operate, is going to change. So I think one of the things that I need, like I personally, and hope would be extended to others, is that acceptance of the new face of leadership and a celebration of it and a promotion of it, and not simply giving someone a title, but empowering them to make the necessary changes that we see are needed in order for us all to move in towards a more helpful and healthy future together.
Awesome answers. To the moderator, are there any questions from the audience?
Yes, one question has come through, and that is, do you see a monoculture environment that is more prevalent in certain demographics and socioeconomic areas?
I guess the answer to that is yes. We are in America. And so I'm going to just be frank throughout this, and I'm warming up now. We live in a country that, while we do have diversity at large throughout our country, it's largely built on a white power structure, and the idea of that whiteness is the norm, and that whatever everybody else does, it always has to kind of play to the favor of that. And so can you repeat that question again?
It's, you know, do you see a monoculture environment more prevalent in certain demographics and socioeconomic areas? Yes.
So again, I think that's what happens. So I work at what is known as a PWI, a predominantly white institution. And a lot of times I had to really learn the culture of the people and spaces of not only the university, but the surrounding town. And again, it's, you know, you can have these monocultures, but it's how welcoming people are into those cultures. So it doesn't, like, monoculture doesn't have to necessarily be a bad thing, but you kind of have to address and look at your culture and interrogate what that culture really is. And then as you're welcoming people into it, identifying the ways that it doesn't allow for other voices, other people to be, to feel like they belong. I hope that answered.
Yeah, and I can expand a little bit. So in my own case, everything is gonna depend on your own geography and environment. Yes, there is a monoculture, and I, as a librarian, am in the minority within this monoculture. For me, from the hiring and recruiting and retention perspective, can present a danger/caution, because it is my belief that we bring new people into the organization because there are new talents that we want to explore, something the organization doesn't have, and we were looking for that when we hire new people. But then once the new person is in the organization, sometimes to be accepted, it's almost like the new librarian has to be assimilated. And then it stifles the growth, not only of the specific librarian, but of the organization, because there is no more growth, since I have to act in, I don't want to use this word, but it's the one that comes to mind, and somehow behave in a certain way. Gabriel or Ingrid, do you want to expand on this?
Yeah. If I can share about when, you know, I still remember the very first open house meeting with or the, you know, meet the teacher night. My very first one. I still remember the first set of parents that came up to me, white parents, were sort of excited to have a new librarian in place. My principal had hyped me up, whatever, and the first thing they asked was about whether I was going to maintain some of the programming that was happening in the library regularly, which is fine, but it only served a small population, right? And and I say a small population, but it mostly served our predominant population, which was like the white students. And we also have a pretty significant Asian population. We weren't seeing a lot of, and this is before me, of course, we weren't seeing a lot of like Black and Latino and other students of color come into the library at all. So, you know, I told the parents pretty explicitly, I'm like, you know, we're going to look at the programming, we're going to see what works and what doesn't. And I want to make sure the library is a safe place for everybody. And immediately the face that they gave me was like they sort of just pulled back a little bit and weren't really sure what I was talking about. And I see a lot of that the moment that you sort of start to talk about, making the space more inclusive or whatever, it's almost perceived by as an attack, or in my experience has been perceived as an attack against the predominant culture, the monoculture, when in fact it's not that. And there's a lot of little coded responses that really have given me pause over time and have made me frankly use my voice a little bit louder, because I'm not going to sit here and let you do that. You know, so that's certainly been something that has been an ongoing struggle living in a monoculture place like Chapel Hill.
So we have, thank you all for commenting on that question. We have another question that has come up. The participant says, I think the idea that there needs to be inclusion, not just in the library, but in the community is so important. But I wonder how that can happen if other components of the university and community are not on board with these efforts.
Well, I can talk for my institution. The fact that, especially recently, after all this social unrest we have had nationwide, my campus seems to be embracing DEI efforts, and that is expanding to the community. And I welcome that change.
Could you repeat the question one more time?
Sure. I think the idea that there needs to be inclusion, not just in the library, but in the community is so important, but I wonder how that can happen if other components of the university and community are not on board with these efforts.
So I am a big fan of consensus and community building, but I think sometimes what happens that in the process, we're overly concerned for bad faith actors and their considerations and making sure that they feel comfortable with those processes. I think it's important that we empower and embolden leaders and innovators and people just trying to do their job to simply state, this is how it is now. And say, you are welcome. We want you here. We want to invite you. We want you to be a part of what we're doing, but also I'm not going to stop progress because of your discomfort, because other people are being more greatly harmed by actually not having access to resources, opportunities, because of the way things always were. And so I think the part of it is like empowering and allowing our bravery and maybe not considering those who would hold the rest of us back.
I think also, and to add on to that, what a panel to be on! Wow. To add on to that, yeah, I think reaching out to like the community and like finding those other leaders in the community, because if we're talking about bringing it outside of the library, I'm in regular communication with like the public library. I'm in regular communication with I have a connection at UNC. We're not in regular communication, but I have a connection there, and a couple of connections with some other community organizations that I think would be worth like making sure that that message, like Ingrid said, becomes the norm. Like this is what we're doing now. Like and this is what we should have been doing. And we are going to center more diverse voices and not label it diverse. Like this is who we are. And I think that that's part of like taking it outside of the library is putting the library in the community and like showing that you're invaluable to the community. Yeah. At least from a public school perspective.
Yeah, I'd like to add a little bit to that as a continuation of what Gabriel said. I think it's also important to tell our stories, and I don't want to dismiss people who are having a hard time with change, because I personally in my own life seen people who held one stance, but after hearing people's stories and developing real and honest relationships, have managed to change and become almost a greater proponent for diversity. And I don't want to ever count anybody out. And it also is the structure of our nation, the structure of our world, and a large part of these communities is those people hold the purse strings. And so I think it's, like you want to build those relationships, but at the same time, there does become a point where you have to say, we're going to have to move ahead without you. To keep it going, but weighing those two options, because everybody, privilege and access are all relative, and so you kind of have to always weigh those in your mind.
It's a balancing act for sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
We have one more question that I think is directed particularly to Gabriel. Has it been your experience in a school setting that inclusion is met by some of your parents seeing inclusion as partly exclusion? And how do you address those parents in order to educate them?
Yes, yes, very much so. I'll tell a quick story. So we're doing a couple of school-wide reads. The 6th grade is reading We Rise, We Resist, We Raise Our Voices. And the 7th and 8th grade are reading Stamped, the Jason Reynolds YA version of it. And so we've had parents say that by teaching this, we're excluding people. And basically we have a united front with the administration in saying that this is a part of history that's been left out. If you want to talk about it being exclusionary, what's been exclusionary is what we have seen. And it's kind of a hard line that we took, but and ultimately it's the virtual school year. There's only so much requirement you could do of anything at this point, right? So that kind of helped us sort of navigate around that piece. But I think it's all about, like, as a school, it's all about having a united front with your administration, with district administration, with, we have an equity team, we have an AVID team. I'm on both of those teams. I'm on the leadership team, is making sure that all of those pieces have that shared vision for like what this means. And then the other thing is, like, I for my collection, centering as many voices as possible has become huge. And, like, I'll just be blunt, like decentering whiteness, like, so not slapping the diversity sticker on a title that is by a Black or Latino or Indigenous author or something, like, that's super important. And then just normalizing that for parents. So, like, when I put out book lists, they're gonna be as diverse as they can be. In fact, they probably don't include a lot of, like, the classics that parents are wanting to see. And then when they buck back at that and ask, well, where are the classics? Where are all these other books? It's me then just sharing the merits of what I did provide, and offering them, like, telling them, well, come check one out. The library is for the students, but if you want to check it out too, come on. These are great books that have the same themes, so if not better themes, frankly. But so it's normalizing this, centering diversity, centering it, but not slapping that sticker on it, I think is very important, and just not giving into those whims that are slowly sort of like falling off and dying away. So I hope that answers that.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have. If you want to move on to your next question.
Of course. Ingrid and Gabriel, there are a few LIS students in the audience, and from your experiences in hoping to provide some guidance, what can you do constructively to ask for the support, acknowledgement, or recognition that you believe you deserve?
Okay, I guess I'll go. Okay, so I'm gonna start with the short version first. Grow a backbone. Still your nerves, and do it when your voice is shaking and your palms are sweating. Work with your friends and talk to your friends and say, hey, I'm going to go and talk to my boss or whoever, and I need somebody to talk it through. I'm going to practice. I'm going to rehearse. The only way to kind of like get over that hump, especially if you're not used to self-advocacy, is practicing. Practice, and be okay that maybe the first couple of times you're going to be so nervous you don't get your words out right. But be ready. Also, make sure that you're taking notes, reflecting on your own work, and making sure, like, seeing how they align with the organization and organizational strategic plan and goals. So that way you can say, not only am I great, but this is how my greatness is adding to the organization and our mission and vision, and being able to articulate those things. Yeah, like, and just, I hate to say it, it's one of those things you got to do. It's like writing. If you want to ever get better at it, you just have to keep doing it. Even when it's bad, if you keep doing it, eventually it's going to work out. And be okay with rejection and failure, and understand it's all a part of the growth process. And so you fall down, you jump back up, and you keep going as you can, or take a moment to heal and do whatever you need to move forward.
Yeah, the writing thing struck a nerve, because I actually just wrote a terrible chapter that I rewrote the other day after, but it took me writing down the bad ideas to then get the good ideas come on the page. So that's a perfect metaphor. Yeah, I agree with everything you said, and I just to tack on a little bit to it. I think part of that, and I love that you suggested that you find someone to practice with, because part of, and I'm thinking back to my time as a teacher as well, part of what I did was, in order to better myself, was I sort of rethought how I looked at my evaluation process at the end of the year, and looked at it as like a feedback tool. And like, I have to thank my teaching mentor from like way back then, who said, go to your evaluation with something that you need to change already in mind. And that's going to make it more powerful, puts the power back in your hands. And then it allows you to open that door for your celebrations and for your achievements, and to get the support you actually need, as opposed to what they perceive you might need, right? I think administrators sort of need to take that into account in how they present evaluations and stuff, and how they have their whether they have open doors or not, to allow for that. But like this year, it's certainly helped me out a lot. Like we just started a subscription through Sora, which allows kids access to ebooks and audiobooks, overdrive thing. And during my evaluation, it felt like we were just kind of running through the numbers and like checking boxes. And I stopped and I was like, so you remember at the beginning of the year, I had this ebook thing that I wanted to roll out, and I was frustrated it didn't roll out. And I took the time and I did something I don't do. I sort of bragged, and I was like, I rolled it out last, but we have the most checkouts in the entire district, right? And so but taking that moment to advocate for yourself in a way like that in the evaluation position, I think specifically, is like a really good way to advocate for yourself and to show support for yourself. Because at the beginning of the year, I said, I want to grow in this. Like it's every year, it's on my goals. Like I want more kids to read books for fun. And so I found a very specific way to do that, and I celebrated it when it came. And I think that's important for everybody to do for themselves. Like you said, grow a backbone, and that's one column at a time, right?
Right.
One bit at a time. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like what you said though earlier, and you kind of said it in passing, the power of a mentor. Cultivating a mentor network, because what happens is that your mentor can give you scripts and help you rehearse. Because that's like, I have a few people that I mentee when they come with difficult situations that they're trying to address or figure out how they can advocate for themselves. I try to give them examples. I'm like, well, what if you said this? Or maybe have you considered these words? Or do you want to try it out on me and let me see what it might sound like? So building a community can help you really in that portion of self-advocacy. You develop your own safety net. So when the failure ultimately comes, because if you're doing it right, you're gonna fail, you have support that kind of keeps and lifts you up.
And just one small addition to what all of you have said, I would strongly recommend, if you're gonna develop the courage, right, to go and ask for what you think you need, that you also ask probing questions. So if the answer is you need to do X, Y, Z in order to get to whatever you're trying to get to, make sure that you understand what is that. And there is nothing wrong or saying, you know, can you please elaborate? Or please help me understand this? Or what do you mean? Any additional questions for the panel?
There aren't any posted so far, but I'll take note of them if you want to move forward.
Yes. The next question has to do with bias in the workplace. All humans have bias. Bias can be positive or negative. A positive bias is an attitude or preference for something, someone, or an idea. A negative bias is an attitude against or a lack of preference for something, a group, or an idea. With that definition in mind, what can you do in your environment to encourage looking at bias from multiple perspectives and with an openness that might allow a shift in beliefs?
All right. I'll start with this one. I think institutions and schools have to provide like explicit time to talk about these things. You have to provide resources that can help people think through their biases, because it's a touchy subject for everybody. And I think also leadership has to be vulnerable, perhaps about their own. And I'm using leadership going off of the wonderful words of Wanda Brown earlier. Like, it's not just the leaders up here. It's like you being a leader for your space, right? And for your sphere. So I think it starts with being vulnerable and open about those things, but again, having explicit spaces to have those conversations and having resources to help people think about them. That's the only way to start shifting beliefs.
Yeah. So I don't think I have too much to add to that, but I think there has to be a willingness to examine ourselves. All I can do is amplify what Gabriel says. It's like, examine yourself, kind of dig deep and recognize your own bias, ask more questions than you answer. I always find it interesting is that sometimes librarians, like, we're in the business of investigating, but it's so very hard to investigate ourselves and to ask challenging questions of ourselves and our organization and our peers. And I think one thing that actually helped me is that I had a colleague who is no longer with us, as in she's passed away. But one of the things that her life and her light left with me is that willingness that when bias shows up, asking the person, what did you mean by that? And I don't know how many times that has stopped me in my tracks and stopped other people in their tracks, because you realize I really didn't mean to say it like that. And now I see the harm. And so I think a willingness to kind of push back and question things and ask more of ourselves every day.
One of the things that I have done, and it works sometimes, but we'll take the positive, right? So when I find negative bias in the workplace, again, going back to if somebody says something that is offensive to me, but I can see that there might not be bad intention, I might ask, can you please explain me how you arrived to that statement? Mm-hmm. And usually people catches themselves, it's like, oh, okay, I can see that you probably understood this, but this is what I meant. And then, so not so much to create conflict, but to ease the conversation and to make people aware that some language might be offensive. Mm-hmm. All right. So if I don't hear the moderator, we're gonna proceed. Who should be accountable for creating a welcoming environment for BIPOC librarians?
Guess I'll start. Everybody. Each and every person from the top to the bottom should be doing that close examination and questioning. Now, ultimately, yeah, like if we use the broader definition of leadership, which is we're all leaders in our organization, in our lives somehow. But the bottom line is a part of crafting that culture and create an environment where everybody can, do the work. It kind of starts as the higher level, but it can also start at the bottom. And I guess sometimes it's also contextual depending on the different power structures, but ultimately it is everyone. Everyone should be in it together.
Yeah, and I again, not too much to add on to that, but yeah, I mean, I think to a certain extent, like I'll just say again, like administration needs to be, and I say administration because I'm in a school, of course, but whatever, leadership needs to be cognizant of the fact of like people's cultures, and I think that again there needs to be processes in place so that people can become culturally competent and are just as open as a person to accepting the person who walks in that door. And I think that's to leadership and that's to everybody. And I think even, like in a situation like I'm in where I'm the librarian here, when people join my PLC, right? Like when people join as librarians at other schools, I need to be open to everybody there as well. I know that there was definitely when I started at my school, I was probably the only Latino, the only person of color, if you want, that joined the group. And there wasn't really much in the way of, I mean, there wasn't anything that pushed me away, but there wasn't really much that like showed that there was like an attention to that. And I don't know that I would have needed much else, but again, like I talked about, it's impacted more in my school, and I think that the school should prepare for who's walking into their doors more, and that's mostly on leadership.
Yeah. And from my former business experience, we used to say that when leading an organization, people are the problem, but people are also the solution. So to your point, yes, it does take everybody, including ourselves, and try to manage our own biases, when interacting with others.
Oh, I would like to add something to it too, because, and I feel like Martha, I want to call back to earlier parts of this conversation. What makes an environment welcoming, right? And so every organization, every institution has a different idea about what a welcome environment means. And I think, that has to be even defined before we begin to talk about being held accountable, because a lot of times people don't know what it means to be hospitable and welcoming in their environments. I'm not going to give a definition.
Yeah, and hopefully it's covered on the onboarding guidelines, right, for every institution, but it's a hope, a wish. All right, you guys are doing very well with these questions.
We have one question that's come up in the chat. How do you handle potential implicit bias when you're interviewing and interacting with future employers? So if you were interviewing for a job.
We all have different approaches. I would probably, if I were in an interview and I see, that there is some implicit bias within the search committee members, I'll just call it out. I think it's better to ask the questions before you join the organization than afterwards. I would like to ask, what is the role of DEI within an organization? Do you have a program? Can you talk about your successes? How this position fits into your DEI goals, or does it? or what would it be expected of me, and have the search community start talking. And if you don't like the answers, don't join. That's a start. Ingrid or Gabriel, what do you think?
I will add to that. So as Martha said, it's like, don't join. If you see it, don't go there. If your peace of mind, and if you're in a position, because I also understand that sometimes you're not in a position not to join. Not join, but I've learned this new term, leave loud. I think what happens a lot of time is that BIPOC, we discreetly move ourselves out of those difficult situations, and no one ever knows what went wrong. And there's a way to leave loudly and try to be as gracious as possible in that process, but let it be known. So if you want to pull yourself out of a job search because you saw some troubling, had some troubling experiences in the interview, make sure that you write a letter back to the hiring committee and let them know why you chose to pull yourself out of that situation, so that they can understand. If you want and you have these goals or whatever, you're going to need to change some things before even thinking about hiring more diverse people into your organization.
Leave loud. That's great. Yeah, I don't have too much else to add. I think that it was well said.
Any more questions?
Not
All
right
right.
now. Thank you.
Okay, so here is the next one, Ingrid and Gabriel. And so what is professionalism in the workplace, and who defines it?
Professionalism is a tricky one, because it's not. I think that there aren't a lot of explicit measures or statements about what they are. I think it harkens back a little to like the monoculture question, where like you sort of look around and you see what people are doing and what they're saying and what's acceptable and what isn't. Like I'll just say, like when I started at my school, they were clearly making some moves to try to make the expectations for teachers a little more inclusive, and I could see that, like, but professionalism is a weird one. I guess I'm gonna go to like my identity. Like when I think about professionalism, like what's acceptable, what isn't. Like from when I started as a teacher to where I am now, prevailing ideas have changed, and each institution has been different about what it looks like. And part of me wants to think about dress code. Part of me wants to think about like how I behave. Part of me wants to think about like how I present to the population. So yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. I think there's certainly this idea that one has to like sort of assimilate to what the rest of the building is doing, and part of that, for me at least for a while, meant like pushing down the best of who I was that could make it better for my students, and that was a mistake, but unfortunately it's one of those things that we walk into buildings and that's kind of just what we have to do, because we don't know, and it's not just that we don't know. Well, we do know that we're supposed to act a certain way, right? That we're supposed to like fit a script. But again, it kind of goes back to the fact that the building has to be, and administration and leadership has to be ready to accept who walks in the building and to see what their strengths really are and to accept them culturally so they can have the best impact. That was a rambling answer. I'm sure after more people speak, I'll be able to come back to some sense of a coherent response to that.
Look, after you spoke, that helped me. But I think in short, to me, it's the simplest way is the expectations of how we govern ourselves at work, right? Mm-hmm. But then who's the determining factor? Because I think Martha, that was part of it, is like, so then who determines what that is? And the simplest thing is who got there first and who has the most power and authority in the given situations. And we forget that, like, when people come to work, it's not just the work culture, they're bringing the culture of a nation into the work with them, right? The nation and their local and surrounding communities. And so I think a lot of times professionalism is so much of the unwritten and the unknown. So if you're not a person from that culture who or doesn't have a direct connection or hasn't been assimilated fully, then you will appear unprofessional because you don't know. You don't know what it is. And it's not until you make a mistake that people go, oh, you're so unprofessional, or did you know about this? And a lot of times I'm like, well, where was that written? And nobody, that was not a part of my organization, those silent things that are unsaid.
Very good. Wanda mentioned in the chat, life through their lens of experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so very good answers, and thank you, because that is a complicated question.
And I'm gonna add on a little more now. Like, so like when I think about it, like, so the first school building, and thank you, Ingrid, for then giving me some space to like sift through my thoughts. I think about like the first building where I actually taught, which was at a middle school in Durham. We just, I don't know, like the way that the building was, the way that we were all in it together, like there was never this feeling that you have to act a certain way. And maybe it's because, you know, we all shared the same experience, and we knew exactly what we were getting into in the building, and like we knew like we knew the culture of the school, of our kids, like everybody was so intimately connected. Whereas here there's almost like a level, there was almost like a level of artifice at the top of that. And I think, Ingrid, it's exactly what you said. It's like the first person who got there, like the monoculture, the majority culture sort of sets that tone. And that certainly wasn't made for a very rocky transition from a place where I sort of understood what it was to be professional. And a lot of it did allow for oneself to shine through. Whereas here, it wasn't the case. More recently, it's changing, of course, but it certainly wasn't the case when starting.
Thank you. Thank you for expanding.
All right. We've had a question in the chat. As a female professional, I've often felt that professional has been defined by men and in a very traditionally masculine style, which often minimizes the importance of emotional intelligence. I wonder if that resonates with the panelists, and if so, if you have ideas about how to counter that.
So before I became a librarian, I was in the military. So I was in the masculine. I went from one extreme to the other. So, you know, in that environment, sometimes the feminine was not always honored and respected. And, but I think, could you answer that question again?
Sure. You know, professional has been defined by men in a very traditionally masculine style, which often minimizes the importance of emotional intelligence. Does that resonate? And if you have ideas about how to counter it?
Yeah. So I want to go back to that. You know, in my experience, what I try to do, like, I guess I'll go back to what I said earlier. It's sometimes you have to grow that backbone. And I'm always aware that even if I'm fully myself, that it's going to offend somebody somewhere, somehow, without me even trying. And it's a choice that I continuously make, that despite how somebody else might feel or perceive me, I'm going to be myself anyway. And it's risky, but it has served me well and made my life less stressful, because I constantly wake up and make a choice that today I am going to be myself, even when it scares me, even if it makes other people uncomfortable. And you know, my mouth is getting dry just thinking about those times, like thinking about those early feelings. But eventually, I don't want to trivialize it, but eventually it does get better. And eventually you realize, if I can't be myself, if I can't bring the wholeness of who I am into a space, then I don't need to be there. And I need to start thinking about an exit strategy so that I can either make this place better and offer you all that I have to give, or find a place where I will be fully honored and accepted.
I also think men need to be better at calling each other out when this man, the sort of stereotypical masculine man needs to be better at calling this stuff out when it happens. I'm often not that stereotypical masculine man, but sometimes I sort of put that on because when I see it happen in my institution, I call it out. And I think all men have to be able to do that. If not, they're doing nothing to help women or to help themselves.
And to expand on what Ingrid said, at least in my case, I guess the staff in my organization is mainly female in comparison to male, or shifted a little bit, but it's the colors. I'm sorry, I like vibrant colors. It's gonna happen. It is spring and summer, and you're not gonna see me in different shades of gray. I mean, I'm gonna be using like bright orange or yellow because that is my culture. But for me, when it comes to performance and when I go to work, so I have to be comfortable in my own skin and respect my own uniqueness. So for me, in order to thrive, I cannot be somebody else. So I'm just gonna be myself, and if somebody comments on as long as my dress code is professional, let's say my dress is business casual, but it's a vibrant color, as long as I know that I'm really not wearing anything offensive, I'm okay with it. I mean, I don't like everything everybody else wears all the time. So I think it's more important to respect my own uniqueness when it comes to my own choosing on how to present myself and be able to contribute what I had agreed to continue to the organization.
And I'd like to bring up something. I think both Martha and I are speaking from relative places of privilege, right? Like we're while we're both very gorgeous, vibrant young women, we have years and we have experiences shoring ourselves up. And I think people who are not necessarily starting where we are, remember who we're presenting to you today might not be who we were 5, 10, 20, 30 years ago. And so like holding that space that this is a journey, and allowing yourself to kind of like participate in a sense of self-discovery and presenting who you're discovering to other people, like having that willingness.
Great. Thank you all. We have another question. As librarians of color and LIS alumni, it is wonderful to see you all engaged and progressing in your careers. What suggestions would you share with students of color in school now to help them prepare for starting their library career?
I would say, do not underestimate the power of networking even now. I graduated from UNCG about, almost 10 years, 2011 with Ingrid. And I still have contact with the faculty as if it was yesterday. Obviously, you can see a very strong relationship with Ingrid and Gabriel. So I would say don't underestimate the power of networking and to have that group that you can ask any questions without being judged. It's not unusual for me every now and then, because remember, we're talking about 10 years span right here, for me to call Ingrid and I said, look, I just have to ask this question and just tell me like it is. And it's so nice to have that.
Yeah. Ditto to what Martha said, the network, but also build genuine relationships, genuine and vulnerable relationships with people. Not just like building your network shouldn't be an exercise in what can this person do for me, but more, who is this person? Right? Like finding out who the people around you are and asking questions and being welcoming. But another thing I'd like to add, and one of the best advice I got when I started my graduate degree in library studies is you're a professional now. A lot of times you hear students saying, well, I'm just a student. No, you're a part of, if you're in graduate school, you are a professional right now. And those interactions with your faculty members could potentially lead to job opportunities and you should be taking your work right now seriously, because it sets the foundation of your actual work.
I'm just gonna echo those sentiments and say when we went to our first, when I was at UNCG and we went to our first professional conference, we had these little business cards that we were supposed to hand out every, yeah, we're laughing because we all remember this thing. Hey, you want to talk about an exercise in frustration for me? I was like, I have to do what? I have to meet how many people? And it was a struggle, but like over the years I've learned, like, it's not about giving out every business card, but it's about like having those 1 or 2 interactions that will then sort of grow into a lot more connections, right? So like now when I go to conferences, and also I'm just gonna say, ain't no, like, there's no specific speaker who's like a celebrity that you need to worry about, like, worshiping or staying away from, or like approaching them in a certain way. No, like, we're all librarians. Ultimately, when you talk to anybody who's presented, no matter how many times you've seen their name on the banner of whatever conference you're going to, they're approachable. Like, we're librarians. Like, we can, it's cool. But finding those people that you share a genuine interest with, or that you see some work they've done that you aspire to, like, go talk to them. Like, after the conference, just say hi, even if it's like I've done. I'm super shy right now, but I really like that you brought up this thing. What's your Twitter handle? Or I'm going to follow you on Twitter. I'm going to ask you a specific question. If you can make sure to get back to me, because like, I really want to know about this one thing, and then following through on that. Much better to do that than to worry about shaking hands with 500 different people and not really building anything. Get out there, put yourself out there, but at the same time, like, seek those common interests, because that's really going to grow your network the best.
Mm-hmm.
You'll never know who you're gonna meet. You need to take chances.
Yeah, and treat everyone as if they're a rock star. Treat everybody, because sometimes you don't know who somebody is or what they have access to. But again, not building relationships to try to get access or to get something out of it, but actually discover who somebody is, because you might meet them at one point in their journey and then you come across them in another, and those connections and those real relationships that you've built, they can create access.
And thank you all for those responses. One other question: did you get a job right out of the program, or did you have more of a journey?
Well, I'll be honest. I had a job before I even graduated, because it was more like a paraprofessional, and then a professional job actually opened up, and having the degree in hand wasn't necessarily it wasn't necessarily important. But I will say my whole professional career, if you put it in the sum total, it was a journey. So I had the advantage of literally having a first whole career before I came to become a librarian.
Yeah, I similarly, but so when I was still a classroom teacher, I knew that I wanted to be a librarian very early on. A new high school opened in Durham that I applied for the librarian position. The principal emailed me at the end of the interview process and said, I loved you, I wanted you to be my librarian, but the district is pretty firm on you need to have at least 1 year of your library school down before we can hire you. So then I started scheming with the librarian at the school that I was a part of, because let me tell you, I was like, those were my kids. I drove them home all the time. I knew their families really well. Like, we had great relationships. So the librarian there and I, we schemed. She said, all right, look, I'm going to hold off retirement for a year. You're going to go get your first year of library school down. You're going to come back. You're going to finish your program online, and you're going to take over for me when I retire. Right. So we had this whole little scheme going. Didn't end up working out that way. But and against the advice of one of my teachers in the program, I went ahead and took a position anyway during my second year of school, which was super challenging. It was that first year is a blur, both academically and as far as like what that school year looked like. Like, I can't tell you much of what my first year as a librarian looked like, because there was so much. So for me, it wasn't as much of a journey. I lined myself up to have things, but I was already 30 when I started it. I had so much I had to consider. Like, I had to find a sure thing. I couldn't risk like the risk of looking for a position, because there were too many things in place already. I had to think about my cat.
And in my case, it was a little bit more of a journey. I evidently ended up in Arkansas, but I remember like 6 months before graduation, I had a group of 3 friends in Charlotte, and we used to get together and we will discuss what institutions we're going to apply to, what were our interests, and so forth. All that process to the time I was hired took a whole year. And even after graduation, it's like, now what? So that something was very successful for us was the fact that we share our experiences while going through interviews. So if somebody in the team got to go to an interview, they will come back and report to the team. And this is what they asked me, this is what they're looking for. And we learn through the experiences of each other.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all. That's all the questions I have now in the chat.
All right, so we're gonna make a switch to code switching. So code switching most commonly references the ability and practice of alternating between 2 or more languages. A more expansive framing of this concept includes modifying one's speech, appearance, and behavior in order to move quickly between more than one cultural context. So the question is, can you talk about code switching and how that affects your work performance?
Okay, I guess.
You want to start? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry. I wanted to give space. Also, I was thinking. So we did have a robust conversation about this yesterday, and I'm like, what did we say yesterday? So it can be alternatively very tiring and time consuming, but also a superpower. And being able to navigate lots of spaces, it's tiring in that, you know, one of the illustrations I made yesterday was that, like, I could be walking down the hall, I'll see my white colleagues who I love and adore and appreciate their presence, and I'm like, oh, hello, how are you? And then I'll see one of my Black colleagues and I'm like, oh, hey, girl. And then going through that process with students, like switching between how students respond to me, how my colleagues respond to me, and changing my language and demeanor to kind of meet the day and to get message. And it can be extremely burdensome and tiring. And I will honestly say all those parts, those are all authentic parts of who I am as a person. But I also understand that there are some people who don't bear that weight. They are always themselves because they are in positions of power and privilege. And I think one of the things we brought up is that everybody has to do it in different contexts. But I think the bigger question is, why do we have to do it? How do we do it? And what is the impact when we sometimes let our hair down, if you will, in different contexts? So sometimes I know that if I go back to my Eastern North Carolina roots and I start, I forget, what happens is that people don't hear my message, or they get so caught up in how I said something that the original goal of what I said gets missed because they think it's hilarious and funny. And so sometimes those reactions can be demoralizing. So it's very nuanced, and it can, it keeps me from getting stuff done sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, 100% that. I think about it a lot in terms of just like a straight up language thing. Like I suppressed for a long time that the fact that I respond to things that are pretty powerful in Spanish, one way or the other. Like if I'm mad, if it makes me happy, whatever. Like there were, when I lived in Miami, for years, if something made me happy, I would say azúcar, like to quote Celia Cruz, because that's what she said, and that's what I grew up saying. And I still remember saying it at a meeting one time, and someone kind of did like a little like shoulder shake, like to mimic like they were dancing, and I was like, a little weird. That's a strange response. So, I had to sort of like tamp that part down, and it can be challenging, and it certainly can be exhausting. But there are like funny little things that have happened related to code switching with like, when I talk to my parents, not my parents, but the parents of the kids at my school. Like they're so for years we've had the Latino parents showcase a Dia de los Muertos altar in the library. Like that's as part of this cultural thing that we do every year, which is incredible. And the very first year, I still remember one of the moms, like we're having a conversation and I see her like kind of like she came up to me in English, and I responded in Spanish, and she said, "Oh, I thought so. There was something about what you were doing and I wasn't sure, And so she sort of saw me sort of wearing the face that I put on for everybody. And the moment that the language wasn't a barrier anymore, the code switching could stop and we could just be us. And it was this great conversation. And she was so excited about me being in the library and getting her kids to read books and this and that. And it was awesome. But it took that little breakthrough moment for that to happen. So like, it's tough and it's challenging, but sometimes there's there's odd little rewards that come of it. And Ingrid, I think it's kind of like what you talked about, like when when you're walking in the hallway and you see like another Black coworker, and like you kind of have that sort of similar cultural relationship with them. And it's the same with me and Maximo, one of our lead custodian. He and I, like when we're kicking it, like it's a whole different me. And people have spoken to him or have spoken to me after and said like, who is that guy that I saw with? I'm like, that's not necessarily someone for you, and it's tough to navigate,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Next question. What action should be taken to use inclusive language in the workplace?
I mean, I just think, I think it has to be normalized. I think like, one of the reasons I like Zoom, and I'm just going to go with the online because that's where we are, is that you can jump on there and change your name and you can add your pronouns. And that's super helpful because that normalizes the idea of pronouns. Not to say anything about people who don't have their pronouns up, like it's totally cool. But I think it's good to have situations where we can normalize, like I said earlier, diversity. Diversity is a norm. It's not a special thing. It's not a special program that we do. Mm-hmm. So I think that's very important. I think it's also, and I'm speaking specifically to schools, but I'm sure at higher academic institutions this happens as well. Like when we talk about Heritage and History Months, is to not limit them to the Heritage and History Months, but to put that out there, to put some kind of significant programming that acknowledges everybody all year long. During so we just passed Black History Month, right? Like during Black History Month, there was an added emphasis, right? But even now, like during Women's History Month, I'm seeing a lot of like my colleagues and the students who are contributing to announcements talk specifically about like the unsung Black female heroes of the past in different spaces and in different areas. So like normalizing the fact that these identities should not just be celebrated. Our identity should not be celebrated just in certain given months, and making it a part of the culture that we are a diverse culture. And so the day that I can stop having conversations about, do I label my diverse books as diverse? If I can go like a couple of weeks in library discussions without having that, I think I'd be a much happier person. But I think it's on us to put that language forward. And I think that institutions need to acknowledge that pretty early on.
Yeah. I would say approach all things and all people with a sense of humility, and while also seeking to understand. One of the biggest thing is, so using the example of pronouns, if someone corrects you and says, oh no, my pronoun is they, them, go, oh, I'm sorry, and then start using it. You don't have to make a big show about it. You just go, oh, let me correct myself. And if you mess up again, correct yourself again, but don't put the onus and the spotlight on them and trying to, navigate that and making everybody feel uncomfortable because you can't necessarily get it together. So it's just understanding, hey, what I'm going to do is try to treat each person as I meet them with a lot of respect and humility. I'm going to try to get to know who they are, also understanding that we all live in cultural context. And because sometimes, we can be guilty of trying to be colorblind or not see, differences. But personally, and maybe, this is a me issue, I've always been enthralled with other people's differences and thought that was so exciting when I met a friend or got to know someone who was completely different than me. And that's the thing I valued about them. I was like, they are not me. How thrilling this is. And now let me journey to get to know them, get to know their values and how they want to be treated. And I have yet to meet a human being who doesn't appreciate it when they are seen. And we're not talking about big pageantry. It's like, I know this about you. Let me honor and respect that. So as an aside, I'm not a huge fan of chocolate. I will eat it, right? And I have a friend, I might have mentioned to this friend, I was like, I don't really care for chocolate. I'm like, I'll eat it. It's nice. It's not bad. And ever since then, every time they want to bake something, they're like, oh, I'm not going to make it chocolate because I know you just hate it. I was like, I didn't say I hated it. Just that's not the thing that if you want to treat me. So but it gives me so much joy that this person considers me. And in the little things, in the things that don't matter, but they also consider me in the big things. And so I think that's a lot of it is sort of like, we all have our own journeys and life experiences, and let's treat each other as if we are nuanced, respecting context and understanding that not all things are true for everybody.
Thank you. And if we have one and last question. So here we go. So what should the hiring organization share during the interview process?
I think this is a question for me to start. Who they are truly and really, and the work that they're doing to honor who they are, honor their culture, but how they're looking towards the future as well, and how they are going to support you as a new member, potentially as a new member of their team. So I'm gonna just keep that simple.
Yeah, I think that, and an understanding of who their patrons are, and an understanding of their patrons' needs. I think that's another really important aspect that needs to be shared. But Ingrid hit the nail on the head with that one.
Yeah, from my perspective, I would say full transparency. If I'm applying for a job, I see it as a two-way street. So yeah, they're trying to get a new hire, but I'm also interviewing the organization. And I would like to know if we're a good fit. And I cannot know that if I don't know the true answers, right? If there are hidden messages or things not revealed. And we are where we are. Not all of the organizations are at the same level of implementation with DEI programming and being respectful about cultures and all of that. And I would like to know that, just it might be that I want to champion some of those programs, or it might be that I just want to, step to the side for a little bit, depending on where I am in life at the time. And that is the last question.
I have two questions that came up in the chat. One is just sort of a situation if you're doing a reading, like you're doing your whole school read, the reading takes place, they're having conversations about the reading, and in those conversations, there might be microaggressions that are taking place. So how do you handle microaggressions, either in sort of a reading discussion based on something like a whole school read, or in everyday conversation?
I mean, if I'll start from the perspective of like the whole school read, we do, preface a lot of the work, or we did preface a lot of the work with discussions about, microaggressions. Middle schoolers are much keener to understand these things and to grasp like what their words mean than we give them credit for oftentimes. These kids are bright. You know, so it's that, and it's also setting the expectations. And we actually took like in my group, it was because we do this work every Monday, again, because of the online thing and the lack of time and everything else. It took us 2 weeks to really get our expectations for class right, and having discussions about what happens if someone is uncomfortable with something someone said, or what happens if someone said something that is offensive, but they're not seeing it. Like, how do we handle that, right? And so we had those discussions, and I had to really ask them to speak up about these things. And it was a lot of like conversation in the little chat in Google Meets, or then it was emails to me. Well, I didn't share this because I feel uncomfortable. And so we had those conversations, and I had to bring it up in a different context. So I hate to say this answer, but like a lot of it, you have to prepare your users or your population well. Like if you know, and working with school, that's a given. But the amount of time that it takes, I mean, you really can't take that for granted. And really giving students, you know, being very clear with them that you are, you know, that you're listening to them and you're honoring what they want out of the class. And so, you know, I haven't had an experience with that, even though ostensibly one of the students in my class is one of the ones that I was warned about, like, warning, this kid's going to say something that's probably going to sound kind of, you know, off color or whatever, however you want to phrase it. And nothing yet. And I think I'm not giving myself props, I'm giving my students props, because they had these discussions and they were able to sort of talk about what that would feel like if they shared it. And, you know, this student did one time tell me, like, I sometimes don't feel like I can talk because I feel like I'm not experienced in this enough to like really understand what to say. And I'm like, dude, that's totally cool. Then you're coming from a learning point, you know. And if you know that you wanted to say something and maybe it was the wrong thing to say, that's probably good. You're learning, man. You know, to say like that's a good thing to bring to the table. So a lot of it is prep. A lot of it is preparation. And then if not, having the systems in place so that if something does come up, you can have that conversation. Yeah.
I agree with Gabriel, everything he said, but also that facilitation in and of itself is a skill set. And a lot of times people go in, oh, I'm just going to facilitate this book club, but they haven't done the necessary homework of what facilitation is. And so that sometimes the prep begins well before you even decide that I'm going to host this thing. I need to actually read the research and see what the latest literature is. And more importantly, know yourself enough to know that I don't have the capacity to do that, and bring in outside experts who can navigate those difficult conversations. So that way it's a building and learning opportunity for everyone, as opposed to being unskilled. Because sometimes those facilitations can go sideways and go places and do more harm than good. And if it's not done in the hands of a skilled professional, people study this. Like, there's books written about this. And if you don't honor that expertise, then yeah, you end up building up more harm than you intended to do. So I think that's important too.
Thank you. The other question we had is, do you have any advice for advocates, for allies or accomplices in doing equity and diversity work?
Listen, and don't necessarily be in a rush to save people, because that can be patronizing. We are all capable human beings, and one of the best things you can do is ask questions about what's the best way to honor you in this particular situation, or standing by and echoing and uplifting that voice that's trying to speak, but you recognize that maybe everybody isn't being heard. Pay attention to what's going on. I appreciate what Wanda mentioned about mindfulness earlier. Mindfulness is more than just like this meditative practice, but it's about being in the present moment. So sometimes we miss stuff when we allow our minds to wander. And I know sometimes that's tough for different people. But I think it's being active and engaged and paying attention and not necessarily being rushed to be the one who saves everybody. Because sometimes the best thing you can do is support that person who wants to do the tough thing and be a safe place for them to land.
In my case, when I look at the library I work in, we've been working for quite a few months, about 6, about creating a common language. So when I enlist colleagues as allies, considering that we all have gone through the training, it is important to me that I have active allies, meaning if you see something, say something. And I also warn of the dangers of silent collusion. You cannot say you're an ally, you're seeing a behavior that is definitely a microaggression. Something should be said. And I'm not saying blaming and shaming and all of that, but finding, and that's why we have the training, finding a way to circle the conversation and correct it right there.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all so much. We are at time. Before I thank you, finally, I want to share some good news that I just have received just now that we can all celebrate together. Dr. Leticia Velez has been chosen as one of only a couple of faculty at UNCG to participate in the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity. It's a huge thing, and I'm really pleased and proud that she'll be doing that. So congratulations, Leticia. And Wanda, it is a privilege to be your colleague in North Carolina. Thank you so much for being here. Martha, Ingrid, Gabriel, I'm pretty sure I speak for everyone in this audience in saying that was just tremendous. We really appreciate your insights. Thank you for spending your time with us. It was invaluable and greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you next year in person, hopefully.
Yes.